So my name is Carissa Doherty. I'm Sonia Doherty's sister. I'm the older sister. I'm not the boss here. Sonia's the boss here. Together we own the Natural Care Clinic. I have two little girls. There's a little video at the end that I'll show you my second little girl. I love my first little girl too, but her dad has all the videos. I do love the first one too. In my background, I'm a naturopathic doctor. My background is in, my first degree was in Biomedical Toxicology. So I did learn how to kill people, but I'm a naturopath now and I got over that, so I feel much better. But I still sort of obsessed about my fixation about toxicity. So the reason why I'd like to talk to you today is I did take a special course in environmental medicine just this winter. And I'm going to share a little bit about what I learned. I do want to be more proactive and I don't want to scare you, but I'm going to scare you a little bit at the beginning, but it's get right to testing and treatment and be more positive at the end. All right, so I'm going to try to figure this out. So this is a quote from a group called the Greater Boston Physicians for Social Change, and they're medical doctors who wrote a great huge booklet called In Harm's Way. It did talk about environmental toxins and how they damage the brain and do lead to more developmental issues. We think now that at least 20% of kids on the spectrum and kids with learning disabilities this epidemic is happening because of the environmental issues. So over 20% is very conservative. A little bit of numbers, there's over 80,000 chemicals on the planet right now, and that's in the US database. So when we think about how much information we know about those chemicals, there's very, very little amount on the developing brain. So less than 12% of data on developing brain on a chemical. So nothing about two chemicals together. So you'll find, obviously, in the world, the chemicals interfere with each other, and there's no data on two chemicals together. So we don't know what's happening with all these chemicals that we are making. 2,000 to 3,000 new chemicals are made every year, and we don't know what they do. It's awful, it's shocking, and we always think about chemicals as being bad. Most of these chemicals are happening to make your lives more convenient, so most of these chemicals are going into your home. And that's where you have more power. So you can have good decisions on things like, we'll talk more about it, but don't sort of get, I'm trying to be more positive. So you can make these better choices and we'll go on. So the way it works is that pollution or toxicants irritate the blood-brain barrier and they make your blood-brain barrier more porous and they open it up so that more toxicants can invade into the brain and affect damage. And the damage would be called inflammation or oxidative damage. And so it's awful, but that is the way it works. We have sort of categories of chemical exposure, like flavors. So I kind of, in my mind, consider pesticides and solvents sort of one flavor. It can all be tested in one area. And then heavy metals is sort of another flavor, and then mold as a third flavor. So in my mind, I just have sort of three flavors, and that way it makes it a little bit more manageable for me. I am going to talk about PCBs. PCBs were used in the past. They were used as coolants for electrical motors, and my husband says, my family deals with old motors all the time. Great. I have those genes in my babies. So that's awesome. They deal with old motors from when PCBs were available. They are banned. They were banned in the 1979s. They were used in motors because they're very long-lived and they're stable. In fact, so stable that no person on the planet doesn't have PCBs in their tissue right now. And that's even the new kids that have been born after the 1979. So although we're talking about something that no longer is made, it's still a problem, which is awful, but that's where it is. The problem with PCBs is it biomagnifies. So the more meat things you eat or meat byproducts you eat, then the more PCBs you're eating. And this is true because the Inuit have a diet of mostly meat, have the highest concentrations. There were actually little factories that were PCB factories on the Great Lakes. And so because of that, the Great Lakes have actually 9.6 times more PCB levels currently than most fresh lake, compared to most fresh lakes. So that's something you can do. There's no fresh lake fish. In Canada, it's interesting because the scientists will actually track PCB, because PCBs can travel all over the world. They're very sneaky and they can travel. They'll track PCB traveling by the butter in each country. So in Canada, our highest PCB content is in peanut butter, butter, and fish. So these sneaky guys, they do cross the placenta. They can get into breast milk. You know, no person is safe. This is why this is bad. And they're sneaky. They damage at low concentrations. So eradicating them is a good idea, but even at the smallest concentration, that's when they do their most damage. And they have an affinity for growing nerve cells. So it's the developing brain that is more a problem with PCBs, where adult brains aren't necessarily an issue. And we do know, and this is what I'm talking about them, is that when there are autopsies on kids on the spectrum, then there's a huge percentage of them that have this PCB95. So there's a lot of PCBs over 200, but this PCB95 is consistently there in a huge concentration of kids on the spectrum. We can test this, and we can get rid of them. So this is the more positive part. I'm trying to. Toxicity is such a downer. So there's a nice company out there called Biomedical. It's in the US. The US have all the nice fancy stuff. And they can test PCBs, and I did just choose PCB as one, because if I talked about all the toxins, we'd be here for a long time, and it would be a real downer. So PCBs can be tested, as can bisphenol A's. You know, the thing with the bisphenol A is they took it out, and then they put, I can't remember what they did now, my brain is blank, but they put in bisphenol C or something. And the one they put into most products is actually more toxic. But the research will come in the next couple of years, so just be careful of plastic. Chlorinated pesticides, organic phosphates, parabens, and phthalates. There's one test that can do it all. It's a fairly expensive test. But you can test if this is an issue, and I just think that is empowering. It's a blood and serum test, but you can find out if this is an issue, and we're going to talk about how to get it out. So I'm going to be very general, because we could have a week talking about toxicity and getting out of the body, but the big thing is removing further exposure. So, you know, we just talked about how Canada, our exposure is peanut butter, dairy, and fish. So if we do see high levels, then we remove that from the diet. We protect against toxicant damage, and we do this with antioxidants. So things like alpha GVC, and alpha lipoic acid. Yes, alpha lipoic acid, thank you. Vitamin C, nice antioxidants will protect and bind. And we have to support phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification pathways. We've talked a lot about glutathione. It's very important that we have glutathione, because this is the rate limiting step for getting the PCBs out of the body. But the gut has to be stable. So although it's a step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, there's no sense in starting if the gut isn't stable, because they have to get out and then out of the body. So if the gut isn't stable, then our exit is blocked. So then in stabilizing the digestive system, we want to make sure we have probiotics, essential fatty acid, that's the omega-3 and the omega-6 balance, a grain-free and dairy-free diet because of the PCB exposure. We'll just say that's the only reason why we don't do dairy, but there's more reasons, but anyway. Rice fiber has an affinity for binding solvents and chemicals, so rice fiber is very good, and chlorophyll specifically for PCB, for getting it out. Mercury, so now we're going to go on to a different flavor, heavy metals. So we'll have mercury as sort of our highlight for heavy metals. Mercury is not necessarily used a whole lot in North America for big bad things, but mercury is used in mining. Oil. We use a lot of oil, and the problem with mercury mining is we may not do it so my husband, when he was reading this, he's like, you have to talk about Southern Ontario. We're from Southern Ontario. Okay, so I'm talking about Southern Ontario. We don't mine a whole lot of things in Southern Ontario, but the problem with mercury mine, so mercury is in the ground. So the whole thing with mercury is that mercury is in the ground, it's in the Earth's crust. When we mine things, we free it into the atmosphere, and then it can go everywhere in the globe. So what is a mining issue somewhere else is our problem. So we have things like vaccines, heavy metals, fish, so bioaccumulation, biomagnification, and that's why we eat the fish, so we want to stay away from that. But mercury is actually a problem, even if we don't, one day we pull the mercury out of the vaccines. We've switched so we don't put the mercury fillings in, and if we limit our fish content, mercury is still an issue as long as we have a more modern world where we are mining. So that's the bad side, but now we'll get to the good side. I'm trying to be positive. I woke up this morning like, I've got to be more positive. So Mercury symptoms, it's interesting because 60 to 90% of Mercury symptoms can sometimes overlap with kids on the autism spectrum. So is this familiar at all? Symptoms include sensory impairments, vision, hearing, and speech, coordination issues, and disturbed sensations. Seizures, mental dysfunction, and abnormal reflexes, and for folks that are a little older, cardiovascular issues. We can test for it, and we can get it out. So the way you test for mercury, one of the best ways is urine, and you do what's called a urine provocation test. So you do 2 urine tests, one in the morning on an empty bladder, one on an empty bladder, so that's without anything. Then you take a provocation test, a chelating agent, so that's DMSA, DMSA, EDTA, DMPS. I'm dyslexic. The D's and the acronyms. And so you take a provocation agent, and then you collect all of your urine for 6 hours. It's a bit of a job, but it's a good test. And then you take 1 sample out of that, and that's your post. That'll tell you, so your first test tells you, are you currently being exposed to a heavy metal? And then your post tells you your body burden. What did you yank out, and what did you pull out, and what's in there? You can't see everything from the post-provocation agent. There is a limiting factor, and that's your glutathione. You need glutathione to take it out of the body. And my husband was looking at it, he's like, you need an example. Or you need to sort of, break it down. So he's saying that I should use the garbage man as an example. Glutathione is your garbage man. You can put out as much stuff as you want to the curb, but unless you get the garbage man to take it away, it's not going to get out of the body. Okay. I know. For treatment, this may seem very familiar because it's very, very similar to the PCB. So the first step is remove the toxicant. If there is a heavy metal exposure, then we remove it from the body. So the things that we can do something about is the fish. So we remove fish from the diet. If mercury amalgams are a huge issue, that is something we do want to think about, but being positive, so let's just do something we can do. We make sure we're addressing antioxidants. So that's alpha-lipoic acid, vitamin C, and a whole host of antioxidants. Make sure your phase 1, phase 2 detoxification pathways are stable. There are 10 pathways in phase 1, phase 2. Glutathione conjugation, or glutathione, is one of the 10. So we talk a lot about it, but specifically in heavy metals, because glutathione is the actual pathway that is needed to break the heavy metals down and garbage man them out of the body. Enhanced bowel function, same thing, grain-free diet, dairy-free diet, your essential fatty acids, your good bacteria, rice fiber, very good at binding, and chlorophyll, great for detoxing. And the chelating agents, so the DMSA and the DMPS. In Ontario, naturopathic doctors don't do IV. So these 2 are the ones we can do orally, and you can do oral chelating. And for kids, oral is better than IV. So why would this matter? This matters because those different flavors of toxicants that I'm trying to give you examples of, they damage our DNA. And when they damage your DNA, sometimes that doesn't make a difference, and sometimes that does make a difference. So if you damage your DNA and it doesn't make a difference, great. If you damage your DNA and it does make a difference, then we kind of have 2 options. Our DNA can exhibit the change, or express the change, or not express it. So if our DNA expresses the change, we're more likely to show symptoms. And so I have a little bit of I think I have a little video, see if this works. We've talked a lot about SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms. So in my mind, I link the word SNPs to the word mutation, genetic mutation, or damage to the DNA.
An entire set of 23 human chromosomes is called a genome. The human genome is composed of 3 billion base pairs. Variation at a single base pair is called a SNP, or single nucleotide polymorphism. When the body makes new cells, it doesn't make many mistakes. But nobody's perfect. Sometimes, when the genome is copied to make a new cell, a single base pair gets left out, added, or substituted. Single base pair substitutions create SNPs. There are around 10 million SNPs in the human genome, which account for many of the genetic differences between you and everyone else on the planet. Some SNPs account for differences in appearance. Others can affect how we develop diseases or respond to drugs. Most SNPs, however, seem to lead to no observable differences between people at all. Since variants are passed down from one generation to the next, the number of differences between your DNA and your neighbors can tell you how closely you are related to each other.
Biochemistry 101. Okay, we're done. School's out. So most times SNPs are not an issue, or mutation is not an issue. If it is an issue, it can be tested. And it can be tested, and it can be bridged, or we can fake the SNP. So if the SNP is having a problem in a certain area, then with some vitamins, some minerals, some foods, we can fake it. So we can fake it till we make it. Sometimes when we do that, we can calm the genetic pathways, and sometimes the SNPs can be less expressed. So that's positive. We've seen a little bit, this is one of those methylation pathways. If SNPs occur inside the methylation pathway, in this specific diagram, SNPs would be the purple boxes. You don't have to read them. And then the supports or the fakes would be those little green boxes. So if you have things like, some SNP supports may include things like glutathione, methyl tetrahydrofolate, your methyl B12, your inositol. Different nutrients can be your pathways. They can help the body bridge those gaps so that function can then work. There is an order, so there's a special, we're not going to go into the order, but there is an order that SNPs work well in treating. And if there are multiple SNPs, I oftentimes think of them as a log jam, so you may need multiple supports. We've talked a lot about glutathione, so here's some information about it. It is the most abundant antioxidant in the body. It's very important in neutralizing free radicals, or free radicals something that damage our body. It is important in optimizing the nitric acid pathway, which sort of keeps our cardiovascular system nice and lubricated. It is important for DNA synthesis and repair, and in every protein in the body, glutathione is necessary. And I learned something during this presentation. Didn't know it was as important in iron metabolism. So that was my learning point for doing this presentation. And it is the rate limiting step in detoxification. You can get glutathione in foods or herbs. So it's very high in green tea extract, ginkgo biloba, which there's a lot of research in the Alzheimer's and Parkinson's for the brain. And I do think it's because the ginkgo does help with making glutathione. Milk thistle, rooibos tea, curcumin or turmeric, rosemary, and ginseng. So great things where you can do to promote glutathione in your body. It can also be tested. You can test glutathione in blood. It is a test that's done in the US. If your levels are low, you can support with glutathione or glutathione nutrients that will make glutathione. If the glutathione levels are normal or high, you have to be careful you have the right amount of good glutathione. So Dr. Mumter talked about the reduced glutathione. That's the good form, the active form, whereas the oxidized can be the inactive form. So just because the glutathione levels are good in the blood doesn't necessarily mean they're the good quality ones. So there is a test that you can test for the good and the bad qualities. And it's It's an acronym, and it's 8OH something. So there's just an example. Doctor's Data is the lab that does it, but there is a test that can quantify the quality of glutathione. So what is it that you can do to address toxicity? It is very empowering. There are things you can do. You can optimize things like diet, organic. I didn't talk about pesticides, but those are really, really a problem. 1% of pesticides go to the pest. The rest goes to us. So eating organic is very powerful, and we can minimize toxicity by choosing organic. We are consumers. Well, I am. I don't grow. So some people aren't, but I'm a consumer. I buy my food, and so the more and more people do buy organic, the cheaper it will be. Leafy green vegetables will have those vitamins and minerals that help the phase 1, phase 2 lubricate those pathways. Your high glutathione foods, diets that are low in your grains and low in dairy, and rice fiber to bind and grab. So you can reduce your chemical burden by not using plastic and having green, clean products. And so I'm a city naturopath. I don't have a farm. I buy all my groceries, but I've been to Chapters, and I've looked at almost all of the green books. They're all good. So if you want to start somewhere, you can just go to Chapters and look at green cleaning or green products, and there's a start. We have some supports on our website, the Natural Care Clinic, but I don't think there's not a lot of discrepancy in the information out there on different clean options. You can test for lead in the drinking water. So homes that were built before 1978, is a possibility that there was lead pipes used for the drinking water. Not the greatest thing, but if that is something that is consistent with symptom-wise, so we didn't talk about lead, but again, you can test your drinking water for lead and then support and treat. For fish intake, we recommend wild, because farm fish actually have high amount of PCBs, because they do. And actually, it came out that the fish in Whole Foods, they buy farm fish, and that had the highest amount of PCBs. So we do suggest wild, white and small fish if you're going to eat fish. I like fish, so these are good options. Vitamins and minerals to support your phase 1, phase 2 detoxification pathway. We do things like magnesium. I didn't mention the alpha-lipoic acid, vitamin C, selenium, B complexes, methyl B12. I forgot glutathione. Glutathione should be on that list. And I did have a whole slide. Oops. So this is my little girl, Alexis, and she's going to say hi to you.
Hi.
She's 7 months.